Shri Chidambaram.
Mr. Chairman, sir. So this debate, I believe, is not about the testing of the nuclear device. Neither this House nor the people of this country are divided on that issue. A few days ago, government was good enough to ask scientists to brief some of us on what they accomplished technically and scientifically through the tests. Some of the reasons were quite convincing. They said we wanted to validate on the field, on the ground, what we had accomplished through computer simulation. We wanted an opportunity to pass on to the next generation of scientists the knowledge and the skills involved in simulation as well as testing. So we have tested some nuclear devices. We pay fulsome tribute to the scientists, technologists, the engineers. We are proud that we have demonstrated our capability in this area. We are happy that the skills acquired in 1974 have been updated and are preserved. On that, there is no quarrel. If that is all that this government wanted to do, much of the cacophony that has followed the testing would have been absent. This debate is about the consequences of that action that you took on 11th May and the 13th May, and has this government thought through the implications of what they've done? Sir, testing is the first step. Next is weaponization. Yesterday, the defense minister is reported to have said that weaponization is complete. The day after the test, a cabinet minister was quoted as having said in Bangalore, the next step is mounting warheads and missiles. On the day the two scientists told the nation that weaponization is underway, that same evening, the political advisor to the Prime Minister appeared on Star TV and said, no decision has been taken on weaponization. The Prime Minister has proclaimed that India is a nuclear weapon state. Now, what does that mean? Have we weaponized? Have we made weapons? And after you weaponize, the next stage is stockpiling. Have you thought through what stockpiling means? How many weapons will be in an active state and how many in a passive state? And after stockpiling, will you induct it into the armed forces? And after inducting it into the armed forces, will you mount it on missiles or other platforms? Has the government thought through all these things? I find no evidence of any such thinking in the Prime Minister's short statement or in the Prime Minister's long statement. I suspect he first intended to read the long statement, but then he decided discretion was the better part of valor, and he read the short statement. This debate is about the cynical, manipulated agenda behind this testing. And we therefore question the motives of this government in testing at this point of time. And we also question the absence of rigorous thinking on the part of this government of the consequence of testing and the consequences of weaponization. Sir, the Prime Minister disclaims that he has no intention of entering India into an arms race. He may have no intention. But what he has done and what the Defense Minister said yesterday is being done means that we are well into an arms race. We have bombs, not in the basement anymore. We have weapons now. What will we do with them? will have to either mount them on missiles or mount them on aircraft. You have made both your major neighbors sworn enemies as a result of what you did on 11th and the 13th of May. And what will they do? They will acquire air defense systems, as the scientists concede. Some of your scientists think that we can get over their air defense systems, which means they will acquire air defense systems which can get over your missiles, which can get over your current air defense systems. They will acquire surface-to-air missiles. They will acquire air-to-air missiles. They may even ask superpowers to provide them a nuclear umbrella. And then what will you do? You will then acquire missiles which can get over their new air defense systems. This is precisely the kind of arms race which marked the Cold War for 30 years. This is precisely the scenario of Star Wars which the world debunked and criticized and condemned. What you're doing in this South Asian theater is a smaller version of the Star Wars in which Russia, Soviet Union, and the US were engaged for 30 years and which invited the condemnation of the whole world. It is not simple, sir. We don't make a bomb and keep it in the basement. Mr. Jagmohan asked Mr. Natwar Singh, what was the difference between 1974 and 1998? The difference was this: Indira Gandhi tested. She did not utter the word weaponization. You tested, and before the mushroom cloud died down, your ministers were talking about weaponization, about mounting warheads and missiles, about an unfinished agenda, about hot pursuit, about a fourth war. Where is he going away? Does he not want to know the date and place of the fourth war? What is this we are doing? These are the questions that the people of India will ask. And what are you doing from your party? Anyone who asks a question is being painted as an unpatriotic traitor. That is the cynical, manipulative agenda that we question. 175 scientists, headed by some of the most reputed minds in the Institute of Mathematical Science and other institutions all over the world, have come out and spoken against what you have done. A couple of days ago in Jaipur, a number of scientists have said that this government has put India on a perilous path. For these questions, sir, we need answers, and I'm afraid, Mr. Prime Minister, there are no answers to these questions in your short or in your long statement. Number of us have asked from this side, why did you test now? What was the provocation? Please remember that many who were in government are still in this house. There are in this house three former prime ministers. Three former prime ministers. The last two prime ministers are members of this house. The person who occupied that high office until the 18th of March, to which you succeeded on the 19th of March, is a member of this house. Some of us are aware of the threat perceptions, threat assessments. We are not all in the dark. We are not all children. We are not all ignorant of what is happening around us. You promised in your national agenda, although you denied it to the Outlook interview, and the Outlook editor either has misquoted you or he has committed a grave misdemeanor for which you should take action against him. He asked you the question: the government in its national agenda had promised a strategic defense review before inducting nuclear weapons. Why was this not done? Your answer, Mr. Prime Minister, was, and I quote, "There was no such promise in the national agenda," unquote. Either you have been misquoted by the editor, or your answer was plainly wrong. Because in parentheses, he extracts what your national agenda says. And let me read that for the record. Your national agenda, point number 26, released by the Prime Minister on March 18, states, quote, "We will establish a National Security Council to analyze the military, economic, and political threats to the nation, also to continuously advise the government. This Council will undertake India's first ever strategic defense review. To ensure the security, territorial integrity, and unity of India, we will take all necessary steps and exercise all available options. Towards that end, we will re-evaluate the nuclear policy and exercise the option to induct nuclear weapons, unquote. If this was your agenda, you promised to set up a National Security Council. You promised to analyze the military and political threats to the nation. You promised to undertake the first ever strategic defense review. You promised to reevaluate the nuclear policy. And you promised at the end of the exercise that you will exercise the option to induct nuclear weapons. Do you seriously want us to believe that all this was done between the 19th of March and the 8th of April, when you told Dr. Kalam and others to go ahead with the test? Your case, Mr. Prime Minister, is most unconvincing. Your case is extremely weak. It is built on very shallow foundations. And I would urge you to share with us, what did you discover between 19th of March and the 8th of April, which Mr. Gujral did not discover on the 18th of March? What analysis, what evaluation did your experts make and tell you by the 8th of April, which they did not tell Mr. Gujral or Mr. Mulayam Singh or others who were in the Cabinet Committee on Security? Sir, my conclusion is that the government has not discovered a new threat. It invented one. Mr. George Fernandes first reported to a startled nation that there was a helipad in Arunachal Pradesh. And when we asked him what was the source, he said the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh. In which event the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh should be the Defense Minister of India. Then he reported that in the line of control between India and China, a road was being built. And when the press asked him what was the source, he said Chief Minister of Orissa. Why does he not pick on Chief Ministers of the BJP party? Why does he pick on Chief Minister of the Congress party? And then he dreamed up this great theory that in Coco Islands, the Chinese had set up missiles which were targeted to India. I have searched the newspaper for the last 17 days. There is no mention of Coco Islands. Just like the great argument between potato chips and computer chips was thrown overboard after you assumed power, Coco Island seems to have been thrown overboard. It seems to me, wittingly or unwittingly, the defense minister was used as a pawn to invent a threat. Having invented a threat, the Prime Minister, backed by his Home Minister, comes and says, here is our nuclear bomb, beware the whole world, India now is a conquering nation. This is the worst service that you can do for India. What you have done is to create an axis, as my friend Mr. Natwar Singh said, between the United States, China and Pakistan. China was no threat to India. The last war with China was fought 36 years ago. And the circumstances under which that war began and concluded are still surrounded in controversy. The last war with Pakistan was fought 27 years ago. Only in the last year, I was present when Prime Minister Gujral engaged Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, in 2 meetings, in New York and in Edinburgh. He engaged President Clinton in a dialogue, at the end of which President Clinton said, I understand your concerns, and I will visit you, and we will continue to talk about it. He engaged Prime Minister Tony Blair in Edinburgh, and when there was so much talk about Britain mediating, thanks to a junior minister's thoughtless remarks, Prime Minister Tony Blair quite candidly said Britain had no intention of mediating between India and Pakistan, and this was a bilateral issue. I was present when these dialogues took place, and I'm sure when he intervenes in the debate tomorrow, he will throw more light. In our judgment, and I say this with firm conviction, China was no threat on the 18th of March. China was no threat on the 19th of March. China was no threat on the 8th of April. China was no threat on the 11th or the 13th of May. You have invented a threat in China. We understand that there are difficulties with Pakistan. But how are you going to resolve these difficulties? If you want to throw the Gujarat doctrine overboard, please do so. But substitute it by the Vajpayee doctrine, not by the Advani doctrine. There is a vast distinction between the Vajpayee doctrine and the Advani doctrine. Mr. Advani, for whom I have great respect, said that the geopolitical situation has changed in India's favor after the 11th of May. He has to explain that statement. What does he mean by that? Does he mean that India weaponizing a nuclear device has changed the geopolitical situation? Does he mean that India will use that weapon as a weapon of offense? What does the statement talk about? The statement says that nuclear weapons will be only used in defense. We asked this question to scientists. Mr. Jaswant Singh was present. Mr. Pramod Mahajan was present. It is unfortunate no elected minister was present at the meeting. We asked them, what is this nuclear weapon as a weapon of self-defense? I can understand a tank being used as an offensive weapon or as a defensive weapon. If a tank enters enemy territory, it is an offensive weapon. Or you can fall back to defend an Indian position, in which event a tank becomes a weapon of defense. I can understand an aircraft being an offensive weapon or a defensive weapon. If an aircraft strikes at enemy territory, it is a weapon of offense. You can fall back again and defend your own cities, defend your own targets. It's a weapon of defense. How is a nuclear bomb a weapon of self-defense? Where will you explode this nuclear bomb? If you use it as a weapon of offense, you will explode it in enemy territory. But as a weapon of self-defense, where will you explode it? And I ask you the further question. I dare you to stand up and say, Mr. Prime Minister, that you will ever use this nuclear weapon. This nuclear weapon can never be used. It was last used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For the last 57 years, no country in the world has dared to use this nuclear weapon. Saddam Hussein of Iraq was not frightened by the nuclear arsenal of America. Whether he was right or wrong is a different matter. He was not frightened by America's nuclear arsenal. Vietnam, that brave little country which fought a war for 12 years, was not frightened by the United States of America. Afghanistan was not frightened by either the Russian nuclear weapon or the American nuclear weapon. Cuba, for 30 years boycotted, is not afraid of the American nuclear weapon. Weaponization, induction of this weapon into the armed forces, mounting weapons on missiles and aircraft, developing missiles to deliver it into enemy territory. These are very serious subjects on which I do not believe your government has a mandate to take a unilateral decision. On testing, we stand with you as a demonstration of our scientific and technological capability, as a reaffirmation of our scientific skills, as an opportunity to pass such skills and knowledge to succeeding generation of scientists. We stand with you. We hail India's scientists. I'm doubly proud. I share the name of a great scientist. I feel quite honored about it. 3 of the 4, and I think we should record that Dr. Kakodkar, Dr. Santana, along with Dr. Kalam and Dr. Chidambaram, 3 of the 4 belong to my state. I'm doubly proud as an Indian and as a Tamil. But that is where we must draw the line. Until then, we are with you. And if anybody threatens you with sanctions, we are with you. If anybody threatens you with consequences, we are with you. But we are not with you. And the point of departure is, what will you now do? Will you go the Advani way and hot pursuit and changing the geopolitical situation? Will you go the George Fernandez's way and weaponize? Will you go the Murli Manor Joshi way and mount weapons on our missiles and our aircraft? What will you do? You have not told us anything. That is where we question the motives and intentions of this government. Sir, Prime Minister has said that we will now be a very responsible nation. We will act with great restraint. I accept your word. Sometimes the poet in you who wrote that famous poem against nuclear weapons finds his way into the statement you are drafting as Prime Minister. But possessing weapons, nuclear weapons, is simply inconsistent with the moral authority that India had acquired over the last 30 years to tell the world that our goal is a nuclear weapon-free state. If you seriously believe in a nuclear weapon-free world, I urge you, I most humbly urge you, abjure weaponization until there is a full and proper debate in this country and in this parliament of the need to acquire nuclear weapons and to induct them into the armed forces. It is simply inconsistent. It cuts at the very root of our commitment to a nuclear weapon-free state to acquire a whole arsenal of nuclear weapons. A word about sanctions. I am not worried about the indirect costs of economic sanctions. As a nation, we will pay any price, bear any burden to withstand those sanctions. I'm concerned about the direct costs of weaponization. I think you've been poorly advised on the costs of weaponization. The costs will be exponential as you weaponize and as what you perceive are our enemies acquire arms and equipment to confront your weaponization. You will push India into an arms race, and the direct consequences of weaponization and that arms race will be simply unbearable. I caution you, Mr. Prime Minister, to do a re-evaluation of the direct costs of weaponization. Finally, sir, this is what saddens me most. For the first time in independent India's history, India's foreign policy and nuclear policy, which hitherto enjoyed an unprecedented consensus, stands fractured. For the first time, on elements of foreign policy, we are divided. For the first time, on the nuclear policy, we are divided. This government has divided us by its thoughtless action, and even more thoughtless statements following that action, without taking us into confidence. Sir, my fear is that from this point of time, this government can take one of three roads. One is a road to a local limited war. And I think there are people in this government who would actively canvass to travel down that road. The other is the road to sign the CTBT. There are statements by a number of people, including the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, that we are willing to negotiate and accept aspects of the CTBT. I think we should have a full-scale debate on the meaning of that statement. The CTBT is not open to negotiation. It is only open to signature. 149 countries have already signed, and you can sign it up to September 99. It does not provide for negotiation. And who will you negotiate with? Who was offered to negotiate CTBT with you? So the second road, therefore, means the road which France and China took. Do a few tests, acquire some political advantage, and quietly sign the CTBT, which means all the carefully constructed arguments of the last 5 years that we will not sign the CTBT will lie in a shambles. The third road is a road to elections. Since I do not believe that you have the courage to take us to a war, and since I do not believe that you have the skills to negotiate a CTBT, I'm afraid you are cynically taking us to the road to an election. We're not afraid. We're only sad. We're just sad. We're sad. If that is your real agenda, say so. If that is your real agenda, say so. The Prime Minister, why did the Prime Minister declare? Why did the Prime Minister declare that there was no intention of holding elections? Who asked him that question to make that answer? Obviously, some of you must have posed that question to him. Obviously, some of you must have planted that idea in his mind. So he had to answer, saying we have no. Sir, I therefore submit that the government owes a great deal of explanation to this country. The government owes a fuller statement to this Parliament. Our government owes a great deal of explanation on the various statements made by various ministers in the last 15 or 16 days. So while we support and hail the scientists and technologists who have demonstrated India's scientific skills, I, on behalf of my party, would like to place on record that we are opposed to weaponization. We are opposed to building a nuclear arsenal. We are opposed to inducting nuclear weapons. We are opposed to taking India into an arms race. As the world enters the 21st century, as nations which were as poor as us 20 years ago march towards prosperity, India would have taken a perilous road, and India would have incurred an unbearable cost just to satisfy the vanity of a political party which has acquired power after an election. Thank you, sir.